What's going on, guys? Welcome to another video. In today's video, we're going to be going over the maintenance and service items on my Civic. So I recently bought this car and I haven't done any work to it yet. The car is a 2015. It's got 60-something thousand kilometers on it. It's had two previous owners, at least to my knowledge. And the car is now being well maintained. Now that it's in my arms, in my possession, I'll be able to take care of it and make sure that everything is up to date service-wise. Now, this vehicle, I have no service history with it. I was able to take the car for a drive. I was able to inspect all the fluids and everything, but short from that, there's no way to actually tell how the car was maintained or even taken care of before my ownership. So with that being said, I'm gonna bring everything up to date. I'm gonna show you all the parts and everything you need to look over, and everything is gonna be up to date and serviced with this car. I'm super pumped. Let's get right into it. So all the fluids and tools that you're going to need today are going to be pretty introductory. So if you guys are getting started with working on your car for the very first time, I'm going to go over all the fluid changes like your engine oil and filter, your transmission fluid, your brake fluid, your clutch fluid, your serpentine belt, and a bunch of other things. Now, the tools that you're going to need today are going to be pretty standard stuff, from regular wrenches to sockets and ratchets. And if you guys are looking for a kit, this guy here from Capri is what I would recommend because it has everything that you need, either if you're starting to work on vehicles at home or even if you need something portable. I'm going to be using this kit in this coming year for my toolkit for the racetrack. I own a bunch of these tools from Capri and they've been really great to me. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use this brake bleeder tool along with some other ones, but I figured since I'm very impressed with this Capri tool, why not add some more of their stuff to my collection? So if you guys want to take a look at these links or find any of the products that you guys see in this video, you'll be able to find that down in the description box. So first things first, we need to get the car jacked up in the air and supported on jack stands. Now I have to say, the really nice thing about working on Hondas is that these vehicles have a front jacking point and they have a rear jacking point. So you can lift the vehicle with a regular floor jack from the front of the car and you can support it on the sides at the pinch welds very safely and easily. You don't need to raise it and support it and do all that stuff from the side. So it's super nice, front and back, supported on jack stands, and you're good to go. So arguably, the most important fluid that we're going to be changing out today is going to be the blood of the motor. That's the engine oil. So we're going to be taking the old engine oil out along with the old engine oil filter, and we're going to be changing those out. Let's get into it. Changing the fluid and filter on my Civic requires very little tools. A 14mm open-ended wrench, an oil filter, and an oil drain pan. A floor creeper does make the job a bit cleaner, but isn't necessary. Roll underneath your car and locate the drain plug. Using the 14mm wrench, crack the drain bolt loose and remove it by hand. Try to angle the drain pan so that the stream of the engine oil doesn't splash when it lands. As the stream has less force behind it, bring the pan closer to the oil drain pan so that if you do walk away from the stream, it won't leak onto the floor. Even though you may have installed the filter by hand, removing it that way is almost impossible. Anyways, with the filter wrench, crack it loose and be very careful of the extra oil that will seep out of it. Then, carefully unthread the filter a thread at a time and support the weight of it. When you fully unthread it, keep in mind that gravity will make it drop, and we don't want it to splash into the oil drain pan, so just be careful. With all the fluid drained and the filter removed, we can inspect the following. The color of the oil, as you can tell, is quite dark, which means it was a good time to change the fluid. Since I don't know how long it's been in the engine, I can't really speak for the engine's health. As for the amount of the fluid that came out, this is a little bit over 4 liters, which means the engine isn't burning any oil, which is a very good sign. We can see that the previous owner used a Napa filter, which is pretty decent, but not the best. While we're at it, we can inspect the bolt and washer that we also removed. The bolt seems to be the factory Honda plug, however the gasket that was used is definitely not the factory crush washer. You can typically use an aluminum or copper crush washer interchangeably, but I definitely would not recommend anything but those for sealing a drain bolt. In addition to that, the factory drain bolt is a standard M14 design, and as you can see, it's not magnetic. This replacement drain bolt that I have here that I will be installing is the same spec as the factory M14 plug, but it has a neodymium magnet at the end of it, and it will be able to attract any metal particles that are floating around in the engine oil. So the factory drain bolt and the inferior crush washer are both getting swapped out for an upgrade and a proper part. For the oil filter for this car and all of my cars, I use K&N Performance Gold filters, as they have a very high quality media filter and they also have silicone internals where other brands typically cheap out on these two areas. For an extra $5 per oil change, that's a price that I'm definitely willing to pay for a healthy running engine. Another oil change related item that will extend the life of your engine is a filter mag. I featured them on my channel when I did the first oil change on my Nissan 370Z. They're very good products, a one-time purchase, and very effective. They perform a similar task to the magnetic drain bolt as they attract floating metal in the engine oil. This differs from the magnetic drain bolt as the metal particles that are floating around in the engine oil will be contained in the oil filter. As you perform an oil change and filter change, the media that's in the filter gets discarded as well. It's very clean, you don't have to wipe anything. The magnet can also be reused and swapped onto the next filter at your next service. I'll show you guys how to install it in a minute, but first, let's continue with the oil change. With your engine oil and oil filter, pre-fill the filter until it's full. You may have to wait for the engine oil to saturate the filter media and then refill it again to ensure that you have the safest engine start possible. Dab your finger in the oil and put a light coating around the seal. It should look something like this. Then, grab the magnetic drain plug and aluminum crush washer and bring it underneath the car with you along with the filter. Begin by threading the drain bolt and the washer onto the oil pan, and then followed by the oil filter. Snug up the drain bolt until it's seated onto the pan and tighten the oil filter as much as you can by hand. Then, use a torque wrench and a 17mm socket to torque the oil drain bolt to the factory spec. All the torque specs for this video will be found in the description. Following that, you can simply install the filter mag directly on the steel oil filter housing. Now, I personally just will put this in the middle of the filter, but I don't think there's any wrong way to install it. Moving up into the engine bay, grab one of the containers of the Motul 300V oil and empty it. Considering these are only 2-liter bottles, we know for a fact that we need to empty 2 full containers before we have to be cautious and start measuring the factory 4.2 liters. Now, don't forget to let the car warm up and let fluid pass through everything, because at that point you might have some air pockets in between the oil filter and the engine, so you may not actually get the correct oil level. So next up is going to be working on the transmission fluid. So taking it out is very easy. Putting it back in can be done one of 2 ways. I'm going to show you both. So let's first work at the transmission and take out all the old fluid. So from underneath the car, you'll find the transmission along with the drain and fill bolts. Looking at the trans from the driver's side, you'll find a plug that has a square 3/8 female fitting. You don't need a socket or anything to remove it, just a 3/8 ratchet. So the drain bolt is found right here, while one area that we can fill the transmission with fresh fluid from is found just a little bit further up the trans, by the side of the half shaft. Once you crack the drain bolt loose, just spin off the plug by hand and ensure that you have a drain pan ready to catch the fluid. I'm glad that this happened. When I removed the transmission drain bolt, the aluminum crush washer didn't want to come off with it. So it'll either stay on the bolt or it'll be stuck to the aluminum housing for the transmission or engine or whatever it is. So in this case, you have to ensure that you do remove it because you don't want to double stack the old crush washer and the new one with your drain bolt. Now, I'm not going to be putting this drain bolt back in there. I'm going to be replacing it with another version of those magnetic drain bolts. The reason why I'm doing that is because there's a magnet on here where there is not one on here. Now, before anyone comments about switching these over, there is a magnet inside most transmissions that does collect the metal particles that are floating around in the fluid. However, you can't clean them unless you open the transmission up. What that does mean, though, is that when I replace it with this bolt, any metal that's floating around that has been attracted by this magnet, I can clean off. So it's not huge, but it's something. So the transmission drain bolt is now taken care of. Put that inside the transmission, and then it comes time to fill it. Now, when you fill it, there's 2 different options. Option 1 is replacing the fluid from the side mount hole where you would fill and pump fluid up into. Now, that's option 1. Option 2 is filling the transmission from the factory location that's found on the top of the transmission. Because the transmission requires 2 liters of fluid whenever you do a transmission service, you can pretty much empty 2 bottles and be set. You don't have to kind of measure it, kind of like what we have to do for the engine. So with that being said, I find that route to be easiest, but I'll show you both. Now, obviously, you can't really see the transmission from here, so you're going to have to remove some of the intake piping that's leading to the upper bolt. You'll have to unscrew the 2 hose clamps for the intake hose, followed by disconnecting the wire leading to the MAF sensor. Unclick the 2 tabs and intake hose leading to the upper air box, and then remove the upper box and filter. Disconnect the hose clamps leading to the intake hose and set that aside. Then, on the front lower portion of the intake box, there's going to be a small coupler and 90-degree hose that need to be removed. Lastly, remove the 10mm screw at the front of the intake box and pry upwards on the back side of the box to disconnect it from the bracket. Now it's difficult to tell with the intake box installed, but there are 2 rubber plugs that secure it on the backside. With the intake removed, you'll have access to the top of the trans. To fill the transmission at the upper fill bolt, you will need a funnel to fill the transmission. To fill it at the lower fill bolt, you will need a fluid pump. Feel free to choose whichever route is best for you, but filling the transmission from the upper doesn't require a fluid pump. However, filling from the bottom is the fastest. With a 17mm socket and extension, carefully crack the upper bolt loose. Okay, so note to self, don't do it like that. Take the bolt out, but just do it in a more careful way. Okay, we're back in action. I got a Band-Aid. Back to it. So with the upper bolt cracked along with my thumb, finish removing the bolt and crush washer from the transmission casing. Then go under the car and install the drain bolt with a new crush washer and torque it to spec. Using a funnel, insert it into the orifice on the top of the trans. Grab a new full container of the genuine Honda manual transmission fluid and pour it into the funnel until it is completely drained. While it's draining, you can get the other bottle ready. Empty another full liter of the MTF until you have 2 full liters of fresh oil in there. Grab the old plug with a new crush washer and thread it into the casing. Don't forget again to torque it to spec. With the bolt secured, we reinstall the intake back onto the car. It should go from this to this. And that there will complete the transmission fluid change. We can now move on to the last of the fluids in the Civic's engine bay, the brake and clutch fluid. So this here is DOT4 high temperature brake fluid. So this is much more capable than the factory DOT3 fluid that you'll find in both your braking system and your clutch system. So you can swap this fluid here out for both the brakes and the clutch with no issues. I'm going to be using this Capri vacuum bleeder along with my air compressor to suck out all the fluid from the master along with the lines. Now to remove the fluid from the calipers, you're going to need a 10mm open-ended wrench and an 8mm for the slave cylinder for the clutch system. So step 1 is going to be removing the fluid from both the brake master cylinder and the clutch master cylinder. So we're going to get started with the brake system first. So step 1, crack this open, remove the reservoir cap, and what we're going to do is we're going to remove the fluid first from the master as much as we can. So how we're going to do that is with this tool here from Capri. So I have it hooked up to my air line for my air compressor. It's attached here. I have a vacuum line that's going to be attached from the unit to this little hose. This here is the little attachment that attaches to the brake calipers, and we're also going to dunk this inside the reservoir to remove all the fluid. Now to turn this on, all you have to do is push down on this trigger, and then Bob's your uncle. I've never said that in my life. I don't know why I said that. Moving on, since we aren't bleeding the calipers just yet, we can slide the fitting off of the hose. Go to the bleeder unit that is attached to the airline and press down on the trigger and slide the stainless clip over top of it to hold the trigger down. Then, submerge the hose into the brake master cylinder and try to evacuate as much fluid as possible. With the master empty, grab a clean rag and wipe the insides of it to remove any dirt that has contaminated the internals. Grab a fresh bottle of your favorite brake fluid and top up the master. You don't need to put the reservoir cap back on during the bleeding process, so if you'd like, you can leave it off. With the master topped up, we can get started with bleeding the passenger rear caliper first. With your wheels removed at the brake caliper, locate and remove the rubber dust boot and slide a 10mm open-ended wrench onto the bleeder screw, followed by the brake bleeder fitting. Now, if you haven't cracked any of your bleeders recently, they will most likely give you troubles when you try to bleed them. Now, my advice to you guys is not go full send and try and break them free. Now, I like loosening and tightening them a little bit back and forth until some of the rust is broken free, and then loosen the bleeder so that you can get some fluid out. You'll typically need to turn the wrench about 60 degrees for that fluid to come out. Activate the bleeder and secure it with the stainless clip. From the fixed position of the bleeder screw, turn your wrench about 60 degrees and you'll be able to see the old fluid that's found in the brake lines getting evacuated. I like bleeding each brake caliper with this vacuum bleeder for a full 10 seconds of the bleeder being opened. The rear calipers have longer lines but less caliper capacity, where the fronts are the opposite. If the brake fluid is very far gone past its service interval, you'll be able to visually tell the difference in fluid color from the old fluid to the new fluid as it comes out of the clear hose. With the new fluid sucked into the caliper and brake line, tighten the bleeder screw and then reinstall the dust boot. Now before you move on to the next caliper and bleed it, ensure the master is topped up. This here would be the time that you would run the brake master cylinder dry, which is not good for any car that has anti-lock brakes. Having to bleed a completely dry system is not an easy task. Moving on to the driver rear caliper, repeat the same procedure by removing the brake dust boot, followed by the 10 mil, then vacuum bleeder, and then loosen the bleeder 60 degrees. Wait 10 seconds and then close it up. If you get close to the vacuum line, you can see the old fluid and any air pockets getting sucked out of the bleeder, guaranteeing a good brake bleed. When you're done the rears, head back to the master cylinder and top it up once more. The front calipers still require the use of the same 10mm wrench as before. The front brakes are a bit bigger in design, but are no different to bleed. Ensure that you don't have any leaking DOT3 fluid coming from the caliper, as it will ruin any painted surface. The DOT4 stuff here is paint safe, but I still wouldn't recommend throwing this on any painted surface. If you do get any fluid dripping, spray it down with some water or soap and water to neutralize the caustic behavior of the brake fluid. Fill her up again, and now onto the last caliper, the driver front. The bleeding process isn't hard, but it just takes a little bit of time to get right. By either creating a vacuum by the bleeders or creating pressure at the brake pedal, we're pumping and forcing the old fluid out and replacing it with new fluid. If you want to upgrade the fluid to something like this Motul fluid, you can, but the process is going to be no different if you'd like to replace it with factory DOT3 fluid. Top up the master cylinder one last time until the fluid reaches the max line, and then put the cap back on the reservoir. Then comes changing the clutch fluid. So just like the braking system, the master needs to be evacuated of all the fluid, and then we're going to put new fluid in and push all that new fluid through the lines. Or in this case, line up, because there's only one for the clutch. So using the same DOT4 fluid that we're using for the brakes, we're going to take out all the old fluid and fill up the master. Since you just watched me bleed each of the brake calipers, changing out the fluid for the clutch is going to be a piece of cake. Think of it of only having to bleed one caliper. That's the difference. So using the same bleeder, evacuate all of the old and dirty fluid until the master cylinder is empty. If there is any residue that's collected on the bottom of the reservoir, you'd want to use another rag like we did before for the brakes to wipe it clean. Now since this does look clean, I just need to grab the new Motul RBF 660 fluid and top it up. Now if you do go past the max line, it isn't really a problem since we're going to be pulling more fluid through the line. So this next part where we're bleeding the slave cylinder, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So this is an extra one, the exact same one that I have on my car. So you'll have the feed line for the fluid here. This is the plunger that's going to be actuating the clutch fork, and this here is the little bleeder screw or the nipple at the end of it. So we're going to be unscrewing this with an 8mm socket or wrench, whatever you'd like, and then we're going to bleed the fluid from this little area. So it's going to be pretty difficult to show you this on camera because it's in a very tight spot, especially on this car. But what you're pretty much doing is you're doing the same bleeding procedure that we did for the brake calipers, but now it's on this. But the easiest way to actually get to it if you're doing the service is going to be from underneath the car. So that's where I'm going to be going. To locate the slave cylinder and the bleeder screw, it will be found typically on the outside of the transmission housing, and you'll also have a line that's leading to it. On my Accord, you can locate it quite easily. It's in the exact same spot for my Civic, but the chassis is a little bit smaller and tighter so that it's going to be a little bit harder to access from above. I'm going to have to go underneath the car, locate the bleeder screw, slide an 8mm wrench over top of it, and then followed by the brake bleeder tool. Turn on the brake bleeder and pull all the old fluid out until you see the different colored RBF 660 fluid coming through the lines. When you see the color change, you know that you won't have any air pockets and any old DOT3 fluid will be removed. Head back up to the master and top it up. Now, I don't want to jinx it, but everything so far has been pretty smooth sailing. So next up, we're going to be swapping out the Serpentine belt. Now, this one is still technically in decent condition. The rubber, when it does get old though, see how it's like black now? Well, it'll degrade and it'll start to turn brown, and that's how my belt is. Now, when it gets to that point, you can tell that the rubber is old, it's fatigued. It may go on you, probably won't, but I mean, considering how cheap these things are, it's very nice, inexpensive peace of mind. So we're gonna be changing this out right now. The typical way to replace a Serpentine belt is with a special Serpentine belt removal tool. That tool will give you enough leverage and the right angle to counter the spring pressure from the automatic belt tensioner. The cool thing about this Civic is that even if you don't have this tool, you can change the part out using regular tools that you'll have at home. You'll need a 14mm open-ended wrench, along with a 1/2-inch breaker bar or 1/2-inch ratchet. With the box end of the wrench on the center bolt for the automatic tensioner and the 1/2-inch ratchet in the open end of the wrench, once you pull the ratchet towards the front of the car, you can see the tension on the belt will be released. Swapping the belt will be difficult with this plastic cover in the passenger wheel well still attached. If you pop off the two clips and pull down on the cover, it will further expose the crank pulley and the serpentine belt. With one hand holding the wrench and the tension disengaged, you can pull the belt down into the wheel well area. With the old and new belts both side by side, we can inspect them and compare their physical condition. The old one is obviously the faded brown color, but it's surprisingly in still pretty decent condition. Now I bet this would still last for a couple years, but I know that after changing this for a new one, this is going to be something that I will not have to address for multiple years to come. When you do have to go ahead and reinstall the new belt, if you can't remember the orientation as to how the belt went, you can Google it to find a diagram online of the proper orientation as to how this belt is supposed to be routed on each and every one of these pulleys. Once you get the belt over the pulleys, you want to ensure that they're fully seated on each pulley and not, 90% on it. You want the entire belt contacting the entire pulley. What I like to do is rotate the belt once you have it on, as it will self-seat. You do need the tension off of the belt when you're doing it, but that is how I get this done. Don't forget to put the plastic cover and clips back on, and then you're set. Alrighty guys, so that there has pretty much completed all the big service stuff for this car. Now again, there are other parts to this thing that, let's say you'd want to inspect the timing chain, you want to change the air filter, the cabin filter, the spark plugs, and a bunch of other things, like inspecting bushings. There's a lot that you can do, but in this video, I'm going over the main things, and I think I pretty much have that covered. If you guys are interested in changing out your air filter, I showed you how to take apart the intake box, which exposes the intake filter. Off camera, I went ahead and I serviced the front brakes and the rear brakes. I disassembled everything, lubed it all up, and if you are interested in seeing how I did that, you guys can find a video that's found right here. You guys can click on that link and it'll redirect you to when I did the entire servicing on my Nissan 240. I showed you how to service it, how to inspect it, and how to do everything for your brakes all at home. Now, in addition to the engine filter, there is also another filter that's found inside the car. It's called the cabin filter. That filter filters the air that comes from the outside of the car to inside, and it blows through your AC system. Now, if you do want to change that, you have to get access to that from inside the passenger front area. Now, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to remove or take out most of the things that are found in your glove box. You're going to have to pinch down on the glove box itself, and it will allow the door to slide down. That will expose the area where you will find the filter. Now, there's going to be a black cover that's found over top of it. You're going to have to pinch both sides of that, and that will expose the white filter. Literally pull the old filter out, inspect it, replace it if you need to. I ended up buying another one because it was really cheap, but you don't have to replace it if it isn't bad. To put the new one in, you literally just push it back into place and install all those plastic pieces back in the reverse order. It's super easy, super straightforward. Now, my Accord is a different story, but for my Civic that I have here, you can see that the cowl actually comes a little bit above the motor, and it makes it so that it isn't exactly a very easy or quick process to change the spark plugs out. Now, considering my car only has a little bit over 60,000 kilometers on it, I technically don't even have to change them for at least another 30,000. But if you do want to change them, that is how you would get it done. I'm not too worried about this motor because this one is getting swapped out, but in the meantime, I want to make sure that the fluids and everything are changed over, and now they are. So the reason why I'm making this video for you guys is actually to help save you guys some money. So I called my local Honda dealership and they gave me a quote to get all of these parts changed over. So from changing over all the fluids, from the engine oil and filter, transmission fluid, crush washers for that, brake fluid all around, the clutch fluid, replacing spark plugs, replace the cabin filter, and a tire rotation, which was included with the brakes. They gave me a quote for $1,500, and that is with the regular cheap DOT3 fluid, the standard engine oil, and the regular stuff that you can get off the shelf at your local Honda dealership or even parts store. So the price of the parts that I used in this video, along with all of the tools, so from everything from the upgraded Motul fluid to the better filters, to the OEM transmission fluid, to the better brake fluid, to everything service-wise that you saw in this video, including the magnets and all that stuff, and the tools from the jack stands, the oil catch can, and the Capri tool set, all of that stuff came in at less than $1,500. So it does take a little bit of time to get this stuff done, but if you do set aside a weekend, you can get all of this work done and put a lot of money back into your pocket. The nice thing about doing this work all yourself too is that if you do buy all these tools and you get this work done, let's say you do have to spend $1,500 on it, you still have all of these tools at the end of it. So let's say you need to do this again or you need to perform some other work on your car, it's cheap because you already have the tools. I hope that makes sense for you guys. I hope you guys are excited because right now at this point, the car's serviced, it's ready to go, and it's ready to go for the next thing that I have in mind for this car. The Civic is finally going full bolt-on. So I'm going to be showing you guys every single upgraded part on how to go full bolt-on, how to install it all, and everything. I'm super excited. Right now, the car makes 179 horsepower at the wheels. It's pretty good, but I think we can bump those numbers up. Those are kid numbers. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any further questions regarding the video, comment sections down below. Thanks again. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.